So hello and welcome everybody to this latest in our series of free facilitation webinars. This one, Getting to the Bottom of ToP, ICA's Technology of Participation. My name is Martin Gilbraith and I'm very pleased to be joined again by Sunny Walker of the Virtual Facilitation Collaborative in Denver in the US, and this time also by Joe Nelson of ICA Associates in Toronto, Canada. Thank you for joining me. I'll invite both of you to introduce yourselves in just a moment. But before you do, those who've just arrived, if you've not already introduced yourselves, please do so by typing in the general chat pod in the bottom right of the screen, and also by using the poll pods in the center of the screen. I can see several of you are already doing that. Just to say that this series of webinars is designed and intended to enable you to learn more about facilitation and ICA's technology of participation in particular through a 1-hour facilitated online experience that gives you a flavor of virtual facilitation as well as some content as well. In this particular session was inspired by the publication of the new book co-authored by Joe and her husband, Getting to the Bottom of ToP. So we're looking forward to hearing some more about that and about the theoretical and philosophical foundations of ICA's facilitation methodology. So Joe, may I invite you to introduce yourself, first of all, in just a moment.
Okay, well, I'm Joe Nelson, and I live in Toronto. I've been facilitating through ICA for 48 years. Maybe that's enough. We're expecting high wind warnings in Toronto today, so if if I shudder, it's probably because the house is shaking from the wind.
Thank you. That's a lot of years. We'll have a lot to hear from you, I'm sure, today. Thank you very much. And Sunny, please introduce yourself.
Yes, Sunny Walker here in the Denver area. And Cyril, I don't know you. We'll have to get acquainted. Like Joe, I've been facilitating since I was much younger than this. And so I use the ToP methods in my facilitation and have moved that into much more virtual work recently. I'm sort of getting to a point where the schlepping of tables and materials isn't my favorite task, but I can get my trainees to help with that. I'll still do face-to-face work, and I do training from here in both virtual work and in ToP methods. And I love doing these webinars with Martin.
Thank you.
I'm complete.
Thank you. And for anyone who doesn't know, I'm based in London in the UK. Like Joe and Sunny, I've got my introduction to facilitation through ICA and through ICA's ToP methodology. In my case, in the mid-80s as an international volunteer with ICA, first in India and then in Egypt. And I've been with ICA UK for about 20 years, most recently as a freelance associate, providing ICA UK ToP facilitation training and also facilitating for a wide range of clients in the UK and internationally. We have about, I think exactly 20 of us here in the meeting room right now. So welcome to all of you. There were 84 registered for this session, and we never get everybody show up, but we may have some more people join us during the session. It looks like at the moment over half of us are in North America and over a third in Europe. And the rest looks like only one in Asia Pacific, which might be Larry. Did I see Larry arrive? Yes, welcome, Larry. Larry Philbrook from Taiwan.
And he has secretly notified me. He's got Evelyn also.
Oh, very good.
His wife,
so Larry
listening
and Evelyn. I know that Larry knows how to use the microphones and other facilities, so I'm going to give him microphone rights for later. And quite a few of those of you here today, I think, know me and, if not me, Joe and Sunny, and quite a few of you have substantial experience of ToP. More than half have taken a training course. And let's see, we've got 4 ToP trainers and 4, actually, including myself, I haven't responded yet. Quite a few ICA certified ToP trainers and ToP facilitators. So welcome to all of you. Without, well, just a word about the agenda for today. The format for each of these webinars is to start with some brief introductions, as we've been doing, to go into some sort of a presentation, some content, followed by some Q&A, and then some discussion where we'll put some questions to you and invite you to discuss some questions with each other and with us. We're going to take up to about 20 or 30 minutes for the presentation Q&A, try and allow for about 20 or 30 minutes for further discussion before we have a little bit of reflection and we close at the end of the hour. I should say that we will be sharing a recording of the meeting publicly on YouTube and elsewhere otherwise, so don't share anything during the meeting that you would not want to be public. And we'll be sending a link to the recording of the meeting and to the slides that will be shared, and also to a transcript of the chat pods to all those who've been participating in the meeting. If you'd like to participate on the Twitter channel during the meeting as well, I encourage you to do so and use the hashtag #TopFacilitation. So enough of all of that. I think let's go straight into the presentation if you're ready. Joe, are you ready?
I'm ready anytime. I'm taking my glasses off so I can see the screen. That's not the real me. The real me has the glasses. So before we start, think of a method or a process of any sort, a counseling method, a thinking method, a facilitation method that you've experienced or led that seemed to have a clear thinking process behind it. And on your paper someplace or somewhere else besides the screen here, write down the steps of the method. And this is just for your own thinking as we come through this process. Because there's going to be an exercise at the end where we get a chance to use that. So this is actually a real book. It's about that thick. So getting a chance to do this, try to communicate the core of it in 20 minutes is a real challenge, which I've accepted. You can get this book from iUniverse.com, which is the publisher, or Amazon.com, and the royalties go directly to the nonprofit ICA Canada. And they're better royalties if you go to iUniverse.com, which is the publisher. But whatever is easy for you. So the intent of this presentation is to give you an intriguing overview of the content of getting to the bottom of ToP, to communicate how ToP and other methods can work with how human beings think clearly, and to give you a way to intensify the impact of the facilitation tools you use, whether or not they're ToP methods. So, what inspired this book? Well, we've gotten lots and lots of questions from clients and trainees. They say, wait a minute, there's something going on behind these methods. It's obviously, these are not just gimmicks. And there's an underlying integrity. In fact, we've had clients who've called us up and said, somebody used one of your methods and it didn't work, and we can tell it's not the method. It was clearly the person, but we don't know why. So we thought we should respond to that. ToP methods of facilitating participation are much more than a neat way to get meetings to go somewhere. They aim to build off the deep undercurrents of history, deal with some major contradictions of our day, create a new paradigm of participation, and bring about profound transformation in people and society. That's directly from the book, and sounds like a big challenge. So my husband Wayne decided to write this book maybe 10 or 12 years ago, and what he wanted to do was to capture and communicate the deep wisdom behind what's known as the technology of participation. And to allow the dots between theory and practice of ToP methods so it's more widely appreciated, and to communicate whose shoulders we stand upon, because we began to worry that the people, the intellectual giants who created these methods, were aging and dying, and the sources were in danger of being lost. Unfortunately, in the midst of writing this, Wayne actually became one of those who died suddenly of a heart attack, but luckily he'd written the difficult chapters of this. So I determined that I would finish this book, and it was published in December. So the roots of the ToP methods. Where does this come from? The question that was really at the core of for the founders was, what does it mean to be fully and authentically human? And phenomenology was something that they were studying, and it seemed to capture a lot of perspectives. Existentialists, which are related to phenomenologists, pose many of the same questions conceptually in practical research. Now, the words phenomenology, who likes to have that long a word? So we won't, and existentialism too is a rather massive topic. We're not going to be talking too much about that in its deep philosophical sense, but that is what is at the root of ToP methods. The consistent application of a phenomenological approach led to the formation of a unique methodology, and as a body of knowledge, the ToP is applied phenomenology. Now, you can forget all that massive amount of language, but what we're going to look at next is a little bit about phenomenology as a core understanding. This is kind of Martin says that Cole's notes is not known in the UK, but it's known in North America as a way of sneakily getting the core of something you're supposed to read for school so that you can pass, but it doesn't give you the real depth. So I'm going to give you just some core understandings of phenomenology. This is just the high-level stuff to understand. Now, Sarah Bakewell, whose picture is on the right, wrote a lovely book called At the Existentialist Cafe, and you should read the subtitle too, which I can never remember without looking it up. But she wrote a wonderful book about phenomenology and the phenomenologists. And she says, a phenomenologist's job is to describe. This is the activity that Husserl, and Husserl's the one on the left, a German philosopher, kept reminding his students to do. It meant stripping away distractions, habits, all of those things in order to return our attention to what he called the things themselves. And that's what he kept saying over and over again. Pay attention to what is the thing itself. Fix your beady eyes on them, capture them exactly as they appear, rather than as they think they're supposed to be. You'll notice that this deals with fake news if you're paying attention. So then Soren Kierkegaard, who was an existentialist, really followed much the same kind of understanding. But apparently, according to Sarah Bakewell, Kierkegaard liked to confuse people. Like if he was walking down the sidewalk with you, he would move toward you so that eventually you were pushed off the sidewalk and had to change sides. He liked to create conundrums with people. But his core sentence is, the self is a relation which in relating itself to itself and willing itself to be itself is grounded transparently in the power that posits it. So there's three distinct parts. The beginning, the self is a relation. The middle, which in relating itself to itself and willing itself to be itself, in the end is grounded transparently in the power which posits it. Okay, you don't have to remember Kierkegaard, but the picture you will see will come up over and over again. Those of you who know ToP methods know that this visual image at the bottom of this slide is one we use for the focused conversation method. It actually refers to the underlying method under the focused conversation method and under every ToP method. We've kind of shortcutted it because, to say that it is a method, that it is the focused conversation method follows that process. So using that underlying idea of Husserl and Heidegger and Kierkegaard, And combining that with insights from Suzanne Langer, Fred Gailey, and others led to the creation of a unique approach to phenomenological inquiry. ToP methods apply a deep understanding of phenomenology, the 4 steps in that visual there, to examine our experience and derive meaning from it through a progression of 4 deepening steps. So here are the 4 steps of the phenomenological method. The objective level of thinking, and there's your bundle of relationships there from Kierkegaard, enables people to look at any reality in an objective manner. They involve observing an activity, generating ideas in response to a question that people already know answers, or noting the key ideas in an article. It's paying attention to what is externally. The next stage is the reflective level of thinking, which then begins, as Husserl and Heidegger said, your internal responses are also something to be observed and paid attention to. They are part of the reality. So at the reflective level, you step back from the observation of the external reality and examine your own responses. Associations, connections, relationships, feelings related to the topic, and the basic facts. This is a step that in Western society we often ignore, or we think is obvious, or we confuse the two, observing what is available to our senses and observing our internal responses. Separating those two allows you some really clear understanding of what is the reality, the external reality plus your internal reality. The interpretive level of thinking steps back from it. I like these arrows because they show that you're building at each stage on the stage that went before. This examines the significance, meaning, importance, options, and implications. You're using the facts that you're observing and your awareness of your internal responses to begin to give you some clues as to what the meaning or significance of this or the underlying patterns of the situation are. Then the last step has to do with taking all of that you've observed so far, stepping back one more time and saying, so what is a conclusion, or what is a decision, or what is the relationship I am going to take to this situation? It can be that I am going to say that this situation is completely meaningless to me and I'm not going to do anything about it. It might be that this actually profoundly changes the way I look at the world, but it is deciding what kind of a relationship to take to it. And Encourage to Lead, which is another book that we've published as ICA Canada's published, Brian Stanfield refers to these stages as objectivity, address, exploration, and integration, those 4 stages. Now, that's a really high-level summary of some really core ideas. In some ways, I'd like to have questions at this point about this, but I think that can we do that, Martin, or is the pattern?
Yes, by all means, thank you. Why don't we stop just for a moment, and if you have a microphone, please raise your hand using the emoticon at the top of the screen if you'd like to speak. And if you don't have a mic, or if you don't know, please type any question or comment in the chat pod to the right in the general chat. Let's just take a moment.
I like Mara's comment over there on the right-hand side. My mom says, too, if you want to learn to draw, you should draw what you actually see, not what you think it is supposed to look like. Your mother is a phenomenologist. Any questions or thoughts or reflections?
Ian's hand is up.
Go ahead, Ian.
Yes, thank you. I'm brand new to the ToP methods, but just making one observation on moving from the objective to the reflective. It's similar. It's a similar process that I use as a mediator in terms of not only what happened, but what are your feelings about what happened. So I can identify with these steps.
Hold on to that, and when we get to the end of this, there's a little bit of an exercise to take any methods that you know, like mediation, and say, how do these apply? How are the 4 steps? How do they show up there? That's very helpful. Any others? Larry's got a comment over there too. What's the actual definition of phenomenology? I'll have to go back to the book for that.
Literally, I think it's the study of phenomena.
Yeah, that's where it comes from.
Right. So
yeah, and that, yeah, and Sarah Bakewell has there's one of the quotes from Sarah Bakewell which start many of the chapters. One of it in the introduction, I quote her: "The things that we describe so carefully are called phenomena. The word phenomenon has a special meaning to phenomenologists. It denotes any ordinary thing or object or event as it presents itself to my experience, rather than as it may or may not be in reality." So it's how it presents itself. And then Sarah also says, and this is the introduction to chapter 1, so what exactly is phenomenology? It is essentially a method rather than a set of theories, and at the risk of wildly oversimplifying, its basic approach can be conveyed through a two-word command: describe phenomena. Okay?
So I wonder, I have a question, if I may. I wonder if you could explain, for those of us who are familiar with the focused conversation method and with the ORID model beneath the focused conversation method, would you say that ORID is the phenomenological method or model, or is it an application of it? What's the difference?
There is a difference, and we have confused those. We've conflated the two in when we teach. ORID is really the underlying phenomenological method. The focused conversation is an application of it, and I'm going to come to that very soon. Okay? So there's 3 other critical aspects of phenomenology, or as the foundations of ToP phenomenology as a discipline. And this comes from the study of phenomenology, but there are 3 things. And in the book, Wayne did the first 4 chapters on the theory, and then what he had not finished were the chapters on how the methods apply them. But he had 3 critical aspects that are core to phenomenology that he followed through with the other in the methods. So those 3 pictures are supposed to show those 3 different critical aspects. One is intentional focus, so that every time you're using a method in ToP phenomenology, at ToP method, there is intentional focus of that method, using that method for that particular aim. And so creating rational and existential aims is an example of how each of the methods has an intentional focus. And in each chapter on the methods, we talk about how these apply to a particular method. Radical openness, and that's where the guy is standing there with his arms open to the universe there. The neutrality of the facilitator is an example of radical openness. I was teaching a course last night, and the facilitator of the course, who thinks of himself as a facilitator, was actually giving ideas and asking closed-ended questions. He has not quite yet embodied the radical openness where the question is open and the content is filled in by the participants. And then methods of inquiry. How do the 4 stages show up behind the 5 core methods of ToP facilitators? So phenomenology also includes intentional focus, radical openness, and methods of inquiry that start with observing phenomena and clarifying what is presenting itself to you. There's some nice comments there. Unconscious bias, Nikki, yes, is about the reflective stage there. And bringing it to consciousness is part of the discipline of phenomenology, is to separate that which is the external world and that which is your internal response, and observing and noting that. It's extraordinarily freeing when you can do it, but it is always a discipline. Okay. Yes, you got Susan. A good question does not have the answer embedded in it. Exactly. That's radical openness. So now we're going to quote another couple of people and then come to phenomenology applied to the focused conversation method to answer your question on behalf of everybody there, Martin. So Edgar Schein, who is one of the people who kind of invented facilitation, actually used this. This is an actual quote from him. Our nervous system is at the same time a data gathering system, an emotional processing system, a meaning creation system, and a decision/implementing system. I found that fascinating. He had no idea of ToP methodology, but he understood the phenomenological method as a clear thinking method, and that it exists in our nervous system. And then Suzanne Langer wrote a book on, wrote many books, and this quote really comes, I think, from a conversation that she had with Joe Matthews, who was the founder of the Institute. First of all, you have to take a work of art seriously by observing carefully what's there and what's not. Then you have to look just as seriously at what is going on inside you as you observe the art to see how you're reacting, what repels you, what delights you. You have to peel back layers of awareness so that you can, and then, I would say, begin to ask what it means to you. You must work to create your own meaning from an artwork or a conversation. And she was talking about the meaning of art. Transformed the way that many people look at art when they walk through an art gallery or look at a painting on the wall. So those two people helped us, particularly Suzanne Langer in this case, helped us create the focused conversation method, which is a pathway to lead groups in critical thinking. So the steps in the conversation method, first is setting the context. And one thing, it took us a long time to learn this, but you need to start with a tangible beginning point that is observable by the participants, because the first set of questions are questions about the objective level of thinking. They're focused on the tangible beginning point, and they're paying attention to and sharing external information, sensory impressions. They're directly observable, things that you can directly observe, and they're facts and data. So these are questions. At the focused conversation method is composed of questions that guide you through these levels of thinking. So the first set of questions are asking people to focus on the tangible beginning point and pay attention to the objective data. There are not answers from the facilitator. They're the questions that allow the group to come up with these. Some people think that this is so easy that it's obvious, and so they don't want to answer it because, you know, what words did you just hear in the presentation? Seems like a stupid question, but what's really interesting is that all of us observe from different angles, like those arrows there. And until we recreate it, we don't all none of us has the whole picture. Yes, Arthur, you're already starting to make the connections to other processes like cold. Yes, exactly. The reflective level of thinking, then, is where you begin to ask questions at the reflective in the conversation method. You're asking people to notice and share internal information, their immediate responses or reactions, feelings or an intuition, memory or associations. Notice it's not just feelings here. It is all those things that are triggered by the data that you're observing. At the interpretive level, then, the questions are exploring implications, meaning, significance, value, story, whys. Most why questions I almost feel I feel in my head connections being, it's almost a feeling of the synapses connecting in my head when I get to the interpretive level. There's a different experience in my brain when I get to this level, because now I'm starting to put things together that are not observable. They are making connections and making significance out of both what I've observed and my internal reactions to it. So asking these questions allows the group to build on everybody's observations and responses in order to come up with a deeper interpretation from the group. And at the decisional level, then, of thinking and of questions, you're articulating future resolve. Depending on your aim, it might be next steps, or it might be summarizing the product, or it might be application. And then there's a step of closure that happens at the decisional level. Sometimes these questions, if you're having a conversation about an art form, like we used to do, I wanted to put a picture of the Guernica on here because one of the first places that the conversation method was used was in the conversation about art forms, and we did one on the Guernica, which, if you know, is Picasso's picture from the Spanish Civil War. And it was an extraordinary experience to have a conversation on it, because the decisional level didn't have to do with next steps. It had to do with how does this inform how are you going to relate to your life and to life itself after experiencing this. So that's how it relates, how the conversation method it's the most closely related to the actual 4 steps of the phenomenological method. Questions about that? I think we'll do the questions right here. Is that okay, Martin?
Mm-hmm. Yes, by all means. Any other questions, please raise your hand or type in the chat pod to the right.
So Martin has put another set of things: concrete experience, reflective observation, abstract conceptualization, and active experimentation. Yes. Is that the Kolb? Yeah.
These are the 4 stages of Kolb's learning cycle.
Yep. Which
I think match very well to Orid, to the 4 levels of the phenomenological method, although the language doesn't quite match. Reflective observation is a little bit different.
He does talk about reflective observation. So once you've had the concrete experience, then your internal response to it is what he's talking about. Yeah, I think it fits as well. Any other questions about the about the conversation method and how it fits? Okay, so now we get a very different method. It's not so obvious. So the consensus workshop method has 5 steps: context, brainstorm, cluster, naming, and resolve. And notice that the naming comes after the clustering. It's not as obvious in the picture, but that the sequence of steps is really critical. Well, if you're asking a question to which people have answers in their heads already, the brainstorm level is the objective level. At the level of clustering, you're starting to make associations between data. It's not yet interpreting. This is why it's not sorting here, but it's starting to put together associations and reactions, memories, sort of associations and images. And then, so that's at the reflective level. At the naming level, you're starting to put meaning on those clusters. And so it is at the interpretive level of thinking, where you're starting to together create the meaning that's behind those intuitive clusters. And then at the resolve stage, where you're doing a conversation on it and deciding next steps, that's at the decisional level of the phenomenological method. So at each of ToP methods, and I only go through 2 here because this is we don't really have time to go through all of them, but in the book there's a chapter on each of the 5 core ToP methods that we've decided globally are the core methods, and there are 2 other methods that are included in there, one which are study methods or intellectual methods. and also how they fit the phenomenological model, or how the phenomenological model follows them. Two people are typing, so I kind of want to wait to see what they're typing. Okay, so Marge loves the consensus workshop method. Yes, it's very inclusive because at the brainstorm level, you're tapping into people's private answers, the answers without having judged them, just the answers that come to their heads. When you do solitary brainstorm and then small group sharing, you're getting the real stuff that people were thinking. And at the clustering level, you're beginning to get the intuitive associations that the group is making. And at the naming level, you're putting group meaning on it, and resolve, you're coming to a group decision. Brainstorming, yes, Susan. If you look at the actual scientific research on brainstorming, it is that what it says is that brainstorming out loud altogether is not an efficient way of getting people's ideas. So in the ToP method, to make sure that it stays at the objective level, there is silent brainstorming first, so that you're getting out what's actually there, not judging it against what other people might think. And you're also allowing introverts to have time to think silently, uninterrupted, and the extroverts to be quiet and listen to themselves for a moment. As a high extrovert, I can say that's pretty important. And then you're allowing people to have small group where it's safe places to put those out, and you ask people to get the broad range of what they've gotten out as a small group, so that you're staying at the objective level. I had a group of First Nations, this was Cree, Western Cree, who were working with the workshop method. Instead of teaching theory, I had them translate the steps into Cree and then back into English again. And the word brainstorm, which is a stupid word if you think about it, came back from the Cree as harvesting ideas. And my image of that is a field of wild rice, or a lake with wild rice, and the canoe goes underneath the wild rice, and the stems are bent over the canoe, and people beat them till those wild rice seeds fall into the canoe. And I think that I would rather have that as a name than brainstorm, because I think that's what it is. It's harvesting the ideas that already exist.
Joe, Ian McDonald has raised his hand.
Yes, thank you, Martin.
Go ahead and speak, Ian.
Just quickly on that last point about the term brainstorming, I know in Spanish it's lluvia de ideas, so it's rainfall of ideas. So that's another nice image to have in mind. The comment I wanted to make was in the objective stage when you're doing the brainstorming. Objective to me also gives off the kind of sense of rational thought, and I'm wondering in this whether or not the creativity or irrational thoughts that might come out in that process, do they fit neatly into that, into what your interpretation of objective would be?
That's a good question, Ian. The irrational thought is more reflective in one sense, but the capturing of what is the objective level. And the word objective in English is confusing because it means both that which you observe, and it also means the end result. And French is really good in this way because French separates objectif and but, and but is the accomplishment you want, or the result or aim you have. So the word objective is a confusing word, and I often, in teaching the conversation method, call it observational. It still has an O. It's not deep. It's not as deep as just observing what's there and naming it dispassionately, but it does it does hold the level of phenomenology. The reflective level I often use, when I'm teaching the conversation method, I often use reactive, because reflective is kind of confusing there too, and reactive. But it's not as deep as reflective, because it doesn't really talk about associations and images, but it does get the sense of immediacy that you capture.
Okay, thank you.
That didn't quite answer your question, but sort of.
No, that was good. Thank you.
Joe, we have a question from Susan as well, who's raised her hand, and after that I suggest you continue and complete the slides before we take any more. Susan, please go ahead.
Sorry about that. Richard Boyatzis and some of his compatriots have talked about opening sessions with thinking of positive things, not necessarily objective, because objectively your personality, your reactions are sometimes hard to divorce. And if you think negatively about what you are looking at or thinking about, it will keep your mind from being able to access more widely, greater ideas, bigger ideas. And so I'm wondering how you might place thinking of positive thoughts so that you do think more widely and be more receptive to other people's ideas as at the very beginning, in order to allow yourself to be open to new ideas.
I think that's a very good question, and the discipline of separating your responses from the data is a serious discipline. At the reflective level in a conversation, I nearly always ask at least two questions that are very different from each other. One often is positive and the other negative, but sometimes it's just different. So if somebody's presented a paper, I might say, so what was exciting about that paper and what worried you? But I always ask, the phenomenological method is always working from surface to depth, so that the most surface is your actual observation, but we are not disciplined to just observe. We jump to our reflective level. So helping a group separate those allows the group then to build, and asking more than one question at the reflective level allows people to separate their observations from their internal reactions and then build their interpretation on both of those. I could tell a story, but I think that Martin is trying to tell me I'm running out of time here. But I do have a story about a group of radical feminists who were reflecting on a conference that nearly blew up, not physically, okay, but metaphorically. And they couldn't answer the objective level question, what did you observe in this 300-person plenary? The person said, that's a stupid question. Well, I'm so angry. And it wasn't, and somebody said, well, I'm really angry too, but I didn't see what you saw. And it wasn't until we went back and reconstructed what had actually happened from the many different perspectives that we were able to say what made us angry and what was actually pleasing, and then what did that mean and how would we do things differently. So I had to take them back from their immediate reactions to what they had actually observed, because they had the same reaction that was triggered, but it was triggered by different things.
Thank you.
Joe, you're quite right. We are running out of time, so I suggest if you would please complete the slides.
So this slide here is really about taking the basic steps of the consensus workshop method and showing it's the same as the picture. It's just more rational. We do a whole presentation called the contentless method in a course that we teach in the art and science course, and also I think it's in the human development course that we teach. And one of the things that we do is take what happened in real life, what goes on, activity, this is just the first half of it, source of information, kind of thinking, and that image that comes from Kierkegaard, and pull things through it. And the next question we ask is, what other applications follow this clear thinking pattern. And you've actually started to answer that with Kolb's learning thinking. And Nikki says 1, 2, 3, 4 all method in liberating structures and mediation and so forth. And you could, and I would like to see you do this exercise, but it depends on what time we've got here. See if these steps follow the pattern. Are there facilitation methods, counseling methods, mediation methods, etc.? I just want to finish up quickly that these are ICA resources published by ICA Canada that are available from Amazon or the publisher that's said beneath their names. 4 of them are from iUniverse, and the Art of Focused Conversation and the workshop book are also from newsociety.com. Those are the publishers. But you can get them all on Amazon or Chapters or pretty much other online bookstores. I haven't checked them all out. That's pretty much all I wanted to say. I highly recommend that you read the book. I am almost apologetic about trying to force this entire thing into 20 minutes or half an hour.
I also highly recommend that you read the book, and I would emphasize, even though it's described as a book of theory and philosophy, actually the theory and philosophy is remarkably readable, and I would say probably half to 2/3 of it is really about how the theory and philosophy is applied in practice, and it's very, very readable and very practical. I would like to, so thank you very much indeed, Joe. I would like to invite any other questions, especially if you were waiting to ask questions. But as you consider any questions you would like to ask, I would also like to put our questions to you and give you a chance to type in these 3 chat pods in front of you. And this first question on the left is kind of what you were asking, I think, Joe. If you thought of a facilitation method that you're familiar with at the beginning of that presentation, now's your chance, please, to reflect on how does your experience of that method or your practice of ToP facilitation or other facilitation, how does your experience reflect the ideas discussed? Or how does it contradict the ideas discussed, for that matter? If you're familiar with ToP, if you've tried to explain to anybody how ToP works or why it works, please let us know. How do you explain it? That would also be interesting. And then what other insights or questions will you take away from this presentation, from this discussion? So please go ahead, start typing into those 3 chat pods. If you'd rather ask another question to Joe, feel free to do that as well. Raise your hand if you have a mic, or go ahead and type in the general chat, which is still there at the top right. I see Archana has arrived from India. Welcome, Archana. I'm glad you were able to get in. And Larry says it's a great book and the most practical book of ICA processes that I've read so far. I'm afraid that's not terribly flattering of the others. and Jerry has a question, Joe. What are you speaking of?
That's one I haven't read, so I will read. I will look
reminds
for
me
it.
of the works of George Herbert Mead, Mind, Self, and Society.
And I want to say that thank you for saying that the theory, the philosophy is accessible, Martin. That was Wayne's work. The week before he died, he showed me the chapter, and I went, oh my God, I've been working with this for 40 years, and I finally understand it.
Yeah. Very well done.
He did a remarkable job. You both did. Sunny, do you have any questions or reflections on anything that we've heard and how it relates to your experience?
No, I'll apologize. I took another pain pill.
And that we're seeing emerge in the chat pods here?
I'm looking a little fogged, yeah, but I'm listening.
That's why you're looking increasingly relaxed as the... Okay. That's fine. So if you have a mic, please go ahead and raise your hand if you'd like to speak. I see Nikki relates ORID to action learning, absolutely. And Nikki, if you remember the stages of action learning, please do use your voice and remind us. But it does talk about noticing what happened, reflecting on it, deciding what it means and thinking what to do about it, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And Beatrice, Edward de Bono's thinking hats, is that right? Go ahead, Nikki, who's just raised her hand.
You've just asked about the different stages of action learning. I suppose for me that would be about somebody sharing a challenge or an opportunity, the group supporting them, asking clarifying questions, and then open questions to help them explore a challenge. Then they would come to deciding what next, and then there would be some reflection. So perhaps tips around the decisional and the kind of reflective stages, but I think a lot of close parallels, really.
Thank you. And Archana?
May I make a comment on, Arthur says in the second chat there, the challenge is the ToP at the structured approach. Extreme requires a rather strict following of the process. I would say it's more like jazz. Once you understand the underlying thinking process, then in jazz, you have to know about 8-bar blues. Like you have to understand the structure of 8-bar blues. Once you do that, you can riff on it. And that's the beauty of jazz. It has an underlying human structure, and then you riff. I think that once you understand the phenomenological process of how people think clearly, when they think clearly, which is what I call it, then yes, you will discover that there's an underlying structure of thought, but it's not extreme, and people don't notice that you're following it because you're following their natural thought pattern. They will often answer the next question just before you ask it because their thought process has followed the process. I think that thinking of it as extreme structure is what people do when they're just getting used to using it.
I'm noticing Kimberly's comment. Kimberly writes, I filter all my facilitation methods, mediation work and teaching through the phenomenology discussed here. It's my litmus test for successfully working with groups. I've blogged about ORID as being something like a universal principle of facilitation because I kind of see it the same way, regardless of what process I'm designing or planning or how I'm looking at what's going on, trying to decide what to do next. ORID is always there and usually somewhere close to the front of my mind rather than the back of my mind as a way of designing or testing a design or a thought about what to do. Arthur has his hand raised. Please go ahead, Arthur. I'm not hearing your voice, Arthur.
Good morning, or for me it's morning anyway. It's lovely to spend some time with you all. What a high-level group. I love it. Not many people.
Welcome.
Thank you. I just wanted to comment a moment about the
lovely to have you back
Edward de
your
Bono
webinar, Beatrice, a few months ago.
Which are, obviously there's more of them, but they relate to the ORID steps, and they involve adding, I use them also as a filter, especially for agenda planning, where I'm thinking, okay, what information do we need first, and then how do I get people to reflect, you confirm that that's the right information, and so on. But I think that in combination, the 6 thinking hats and this ORID method and the focused conversation are they make a powerful combination. I guess that would be my point.
Mm-hmm. Right. Thank you. And I noticed Larry's talking as well in the left-hand chat pod about combining focused conversation with World Cafe. I do the same. I mean, one of the great part of the power of ORID for me is that it does combine with literally anything else. In fact, ToP, because it's based on ORID, I find can be adapted and applied with just about any other facilitation method or tool. So do you see any other
there was some comment about design and about underlying pattern for a larger process, and that I didn't mention that, but there is a chapter on design in the book, and often I use ORID as an underlying pattern for structuring whatever tools I'm using. So, the first session of a 2-day conference, the first morning is about reports, maybe, and the second one is about reactions to the reports, or and the third session is starting to have implications for the future, and the last session is is action plans. So there's an underlying ORID structure, thinking structure underneath, and which is not the focused conversation method at all. It is using ORID as the underlying structure. So whatever Cyril talking about 4-step exploration process, yes. Cyril is YPO. My understanding of it is Young Presidents Organization, but I don't know what that particular acronym means in this case.
Not sure what that is. I'm remembering, Joe, that the very first webinar in this series that I did a couple of years ago was actually based on my blog post, ORID as a Universal Principle of Facilitation, and in it I include half a dozen examples of how I've used ORID as a means of structuring the design of a process and adapting and applying a number of different tools within a larger process based on an ORID structure. I'm interested to see the reference to James Britton in England as well, reflecting what we're speaking of here. I haven't come across him, so I'll have to look that up. We're almost out of time. Thank you very much indeed, Joe. I've taken the liberty of relieving Sunny of her webcam for the time being, but we'll see if she's ready to come back in the closing screen. We have just a couple of minutes before we're due to close. Just before we close, please do share any feedback on today's session in the general chat pod to the top right, and also in terms of a rating in the middle there. If you'd like to connect with each other, then I invite you to wait a couple of moments until I switch off the recording, and then share any contact details you'd like to share in the chat pod in the center right there. And I'll copy all of that to all of you in order to connect with each other. Already the next free facilitation webinar in this series is available for you to register if you'd like to come back again and join me and Sunny in June. On the 14th of June, we'll be joined by Rob Work, another long-term ICA colleague and author who's also just published a book, this one called A Compassionate Civilization. And I'll be asking him, I have asked him to talk in particular about how his experience of facilitation and ICA's technology and participation in particular inspired his thoughts in the book about how a compassionate civilization might look and also how we might get there from here. He's actually used ICA's participatory strategic planning process as a structure, the stages of that process as a structure for the book, which I found very interesting. Another book which I strongly recommend for you to get a hold of. So do come back for that. Thank you very much indeed for joining us, and thank you very much indeed, Joe, in particular, for sharing of all your wisdom and your experience of the book. With that, I shall switch off the recording, but please do feel free to stay on